Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
So glad to be here to dig into this one.
Yeah, I'm excited. So imagine holding a tiny, super delicate fish in a frying pan.
Ooh, I like this analogy already.
Right. Okay, so if you poke it with a spatula or, flip it obsessively and you scrape the bottom just to make sure it isn't sticking.
You completely destroy it.
Exactly. The fish totally disintegrates. It just turns into this unappetizing pile of mush.
Because you literally ruined it by trying to manage it too closely.
Right. And today we're looking at a deeply influential blueprint from this ancient text focused on the Tao. Specifically, chapters 51 through 60. And the core argument here is that human beings, our relationships, our creative project,
basically our entire societies.
Yeah, they operate exactly like that delicate fish. I mean, we live in an era where the default response to any form of chaos or, uncertainty is just to grip tighter.
Oh, for sure. We pass another rule or we shout a little louder. We just try to force an outcome.
And the staggering proposition we're exploring today is that our modern instinct to control is actually the very mechanism tearing our lives apart.
Yeah, and the historical reality surrounding these chapters makes that proposition even more compelling, honestly.
Because it wasn't written in a vacuum.
Right? Not at all. We aren't looking at philosophy written from a place of, comfortable, detached privilege. The author was observing a society in the midst of profound fracture.
Just total chaos.
Exactly. It was an ancient world plagued by constant warfare, deeply entrenched poverty, intense social disorder, and really highly oppressive top-down governance.
So the leaders were totally disconnected from the people.
Oh, completely insulated from the reality of the common people. You had leaders who were flaunting immense wealth, passing endless complicated laws to control the populace, building massive monuments to their own egos. And yet
people were starving.
Literally starving in the fields. The prevailing logic of the day was basically that safety comes from, building a thicker wall or forging a sharper sword.
Which is such a natural human reflex. I mean, when you're living in a dangerous, unpredictable environment, you want to build armor.
Right. You want to protect yourself.
Yeah, we want to accumulate wealth, fortify our positions, and just micromanage our surroundings so nothing can ever catch us off guard. But the text is saying that true power and endurance come from this radical, counterintuitive humility.
Softness, really.
Right, softness. It advocates for what it calls non-action, which we should clarify is not laziness.
No, definitely not laziness. It's the profound discipline of allowing things to naturally mature without forcing them.
And I think what's so wild is that this isn't presented as just poetic idealism.
Right. The author is observing the natural world and arguing that this is the fundamental physics of the universe.
Yeah.
Human beings seem to be the only creatures that actively try to operate contrary to the foundational way of reality.
We're the only ones trying to force the river to flow backwards.
Exactly. So to understand how to navigate a chaotic world, we have to look at how this foundational force, the Tao, the underlying path of reality, actually operates.
Right. And chapter 51 describes this as the mysterious operation.
Yeah, the mysterious operation. It states that all things are produced by the Tao and nourished by its outflowing operation.
They receive their forms according to the nature of each, right?
Right, and they are completed according to the circumstances of their condition. The text details how this force produces, nourishes, brings things to full growth, and maintains them. But then it introduces this massive paradox.
Okay, hit me with it.
It says that this force produces things but makes no claim to the possession of them.
Wow.
It carries them through their processes and does not vaunt its ability in doing so. It brings them to maturity and exercises no control over them.
The complete decoupling of creation and ownership, that fundamentally breaks the modern economic and social framework we live in.
It shatters it completely.
Because we operate entirely on the premise that production equals possession. If I build the startup, I own it. I get to dictate its every move.
If you write the code, it's your intellectual property.
Exactly. Or, if I raise a child, that child is a direct reflection of my parenting. So I have an obligation to control their environment to ensure they succeed.
Right. We have so deeply internalized the belief that to be a creator or a parent or a leader is to be an owner.
And ownership grants the absolute right to control.
But the psychology behind that need for control is really rooted in anxiety. Think about phenomena like helicopter parenting.
Oh, yeah, the endless schedules and tracking apps.
Right, we see a profound fear of the unpredictable. Parents produce a child, nourish them, and then feel this crushing pressure to micromanage every single variable: the child's schedule, their friendships, their academic performance.
But what happens mechanistically when we actually do that? Because I feel like it backfires.
It totally backfires. By removing all friction and making every decision for the child, we actually deprive them of the opportunity to develop their own internal compass.
They don't learn how to navigate.
Exactly. Remember, the text says things receive their forms according to the nature of each. A child, or a creative project, or a team of employees, they have an internal blueprint.
So when a manager or a parent constantly intervenes,
They are overriding that natural blueprint with their own rigid will. They literally become a bottleneck. The project can only grow as large, or the child can only become as resilient as the manager's or parent's limited cognitive capacity allows.
Man, that makes me think about my own calendar. I mean, I look at how much time I spend in meetings just trying to steer projects exactly the way I see them in my head.
It's exhausting, isn't it?
I am exhausting myself.
Yeah.
But there is a very real fear here. Like, for you listening to this, if you relinquish control over the things you're bringing to maturity, doesn't that just invite absolute chaos?
That's the fear, yeah.
Like, if I don't poke the fish, won't it burn? We equate leadership with control because we basically equate safety with control.
But the text points out the hidden cost of that forced control. When you demand that a complex system conform entirely to your rigid will, you aren't ensuring success. You are introducing immense friction.
You're stunting the natural development.
Right, of the very thing you claim to care about. The mysterious operation provides the right conditions, like the nourishment, the soil, the water. But it allows the seed to take form according to its own nature.
You can't pull a tree out of a seed to make it grow faster.
No, the pull will just uproot it.
Yeah.
And chapter 52 expands on this by introducing the metaphor of the mother.
Okay, how so?
It states that the Tao is the mother of everything under the sky.
Mhm.
And the advice is that when one knows they are their mother's child and proceeds to guard the qualities of the mother, they will be free from all peril to the end of their life.
And does it define what those qualities are?
It does. It's very explicit. It says the perception of what is small is the secret of clear-sightedness, and the guarding of what is soft and tender is the secret of strength.
Guarding what is soft and tender as the secret of strength. That flies in the face of literally every corporate leadership seminar I've ever seen.
Or any political campaign strategy today.
Right. We are taught that strength is armor. Strength is loud, it's hard, it's forceful. Strength is the ability to exert massive, undeniable pressure to alter your environment.
But the counterargument here is that exerting massive force is actually a symptom of profound weakness and panic, really.
Because you lost control of the subtleties.
Exactly. If you have to use a sledgehammer to fix a situation, it means you lack clear-sightedness. You missed all the small, subtle, tender signs that the situation was going off course weeks or months ago.
You ignored the microdynamics until it was a crisis.
Right. And the text warns about the consequences of this aggressive posturing. It says that if a person keeps their mouth open and spends their breath in the promotion of their affairs, all their life there will be no safety for them.
Oh, wow. That line is a gut punch. Spend his breath in the promotion of his affairs.
It's vivid, isn't it?
It perfectly describes the exhaustion of the modern worker. We spend our lives pitching ourselves, marketing our personal brands, arguing our points on social media.
Just trying to force the world to recognize our value.
Yeah. We are literally spending our breath promoting our affairs. And the text claims this brings no safety.
None. By constantly striving and promoting, we just make ourselves a target. We enter a state of perpetual conflict with reality, fighting the natural current.
So how do we stop? How do we conserve that energy?
Well, it requires a completely different approach. The alternative proposed is to keep the mouth closed and shut up the portals.
Shut up the portals. That's a great phrase.
It's a metaphorical way of saying we must stop trying to force our will onto every single situation. Think about when you walk into a tense family discussion or a high-stakes board meeting.
My immediate instinct is to interject, to steer it,
Yeah.
to promote my agenda.
Exactly. But the discipline is to observe the small dynamics first. Notice the body language. Listen to the underlying anxieties of the people speaking.
And just wait.
Yeah. Often you will find that a situation resolves itself, or a far more elegant solution emerges when you don't forcefully impose your ego upon it. You save an immense amount of cognitive and emotional energy.
It changes how I view my own internal resources. We all have projects or teams or relationships we are trying to, produce and nourish.
Right.
If you're constantly exhausted, it might be because you're vaunting your ability and demanding total control over the outcome.
You're pulling on the seed.
Yeah, providing the nourishment, the resources, the supportive environment, and then just stepping back to allow the natural processes to take over sounds like an incredible relief.
It is a relief, but we don't naturally do it.
Why not?
Because we are drawn to the exhaustion of control, because the alternative feels too quiet. We get distracted.
Right, the need to feel important.
Chapter 53 paints a vivid, biting picture of this distractibility. It says, the great way is very level and easy, but people love the byways.
The byways, like the shortcuts or the scenic routes.
More like the flashy distractions. The author describes rulers whose courtyards and buildings are well kept, but whose fields are ill-cultivated and granaries very empty.
Oh, I see.
They wear elegant robes, carry sharp swords, pamper themselves, and have a superabundance of wealth. And the author calls them robbers and boasters.
Robbers and boasters, I love that.
The imagery of the well-kept courtyard and the ill-cultivated field is just a devastating critique of human vanity.
But wait, is the author just criticizing the existence of wealth or beautiful things entirely?
No, the core of the critique isn't just having nice things. It's the structural imbalance. The resources are being fundamentally misallocated.
Okay, unpack that for me.
The fields represent the foundational work, the real value, the quiet sustenance that keeps a community alive. The courtyards represent the public image, the ego, the superficial display, designed purely to impress onlookers.
Ah, I get it.
So when a leader or an individual prioritizes the courtyard over the fields, they become a robber, because they are extracting vital, life-sustaining nutrients from the root of the system just to paint the fences.
That is the perfect architectural blueprint for modern hustle culture. I mean, we build these incredibly polished external avatars. We curate our social media feeds to look like elegant robes.
Oh, absolutely.
We spend millions on corporate rebrands and beautiful glass headquarters, which are the ultimate well-kept courtyards.
But internally,
mentally, spiritually, the granaries are empty. The actual product the company makes is terrible. The employees are burning out.
the fields are ill-cultivated.
Right. We spend 80 hours a week polishing our careers while our health, our marriages, and our inner peace, our fields, are turning to dust.
And we love those byways because they offer immediate applause.
Yeah. A well-kept courtyard gets likes and compliments from everyone walking past. An ill-cultivated field is only known to the farmer.
At least until winter arrives and there's nothing to eat.
Oof, that's dark. But it's true. And the consequence of that emptiness isn't just contained to the individual, is it?
No, not at all. Chapter 54 maps out how this fundamental orientation radiates outward. It notes that the effect of following the true way, or ignoring it, moves sequentially.
Like a ripple effect.
Exactly. It starts in the person. From the person, it ripples to the family. From the family to the neighborhood. From the neighborhood to the state, and finally it affects the entire kingdom.
And that's a huge scale.
We tend to view global chaos or economic instability or political polarization as these massive detached forces happening out there. But the philosophical argument here is that systemic disorder is simply the macro expression of millions of individuals operating with empty granaries and ill-cultivated internal fields.
So if the individual is obsessed with boastful displays, the family becomes a stage for ego rather than a place of nourishment.
Right. And if families are fractured by ego, the neighborhood loses its cohesion. And eventually the state itself becomes nothing more than a giant hollow courtyard.
That puts an immense weight on personal responsibility. The state of the world is basically a reflection of the state of my own internal field.
It is.
So if boastful strength, sharp swords, and elegant robes are a dead end, if that armored, aggressive posture is actually fragility disguised as strength, we have to look for a different model of durability.
And the text points to what has to be the most counterintuitive source imaginable.
Okay, what is it?
In chapters 55, 58, and 59, it tells us to look at an infant.
Wait, a baby?
A baby. Chapter 55 says that one who has in himself abundantly the attributes of the Tao is like an infant. Poisonous insects will not sting him. Fierce beasts will not seize him.
Okay, but how does an infant represent strength?
It highlights that the infant's bones are weak, its sinews are soft, but its grasp is incredibly firm. And crucially, it can cry all day without its throat going hoarse, demonstrating perfect harmony in its constitution.
That is wild. It forces us to completely reevaluate what makes something durable.
In our modern mindset, an infant represents ultimate vulnerability, right? Something that requires constant external protection.
Exactly.
But the text asks us to look at the mechanics of the infant state. Why doesn't the infant go hoarse when it cries?
I've actually wondered that. My toddler can scream for hours.
Right. It's because there is no internal resistance. An adult screaming in anger restricts their vocal cords, tenses their neck muscles, and forces the sound through a rigid pathway, which tears the tissue and causes hoarseness.
But the baby doesn't do that.
The infant breathes from the belly, entirely relaxed, in total harmony with its own physical reality. There is no ego, no manufactured tension, no rigidity. The softness of the infant's sinews allows it to absorb the world without breaking.
Wow, this connects directly to how we build massive structures today. If you look at modern structural engineering, especially in places prone to earthquakes or hurricane-force winds, the last thing you want to build is a completely rigid, immovable block of steel and concrete.
Because it would just shatter.
Exactly. A completely stiff building will absorb all the kinetic energy of an earthquake and just snap in half. To survive, engineers have to build softness and flexibility into the foundation. The building actually has to sway.
We see this in biology all the time, too.
Yeah. A young sapling bends entirely to the ground in a fierce storm, the wind passes over it, and it stands back up. But the massive, old, supposedly strong oak tree, which has grown thick and unyielding,
it catches all the force of the wind and gets completely uprooted, or its heavy branches snap off.
That biological reality is the exact warning the author issues, isn't it?
Yes. The text explicitly states that when things have become strong, they then become old, which is contrary to the Tao, and whatever is contrary to the Tao soon ends.
That is a chilling observation for anyone living in the modern world. We spend our entire adult lives trying to reach a state of maximum strength.
We want dense, stiff muscles.
We build rigid emotional defenses, right? Like vowing never to be hurt again, establishing ironclad contracts and inflexible boundaries.
We truly believe that if we can just become hard enough, we will be invincible.
But the underlying physics of reality dictates that the moment you achieve maximum rigidity, you have initiated your own death.
You will become brittle.
Yeah, a rigid psychological state cannot absorb the inevitable shocks of life. It shatters. Pliability, adaptability, and softness. These are the mechanical requirements for sustained life and growth.
Exactly.
So how does a person embodying this soft, adaptable, infant-like state actually interact with a rigid world?
Well, Chapter 58 offers an incredible framework for emotional intelligence here. It describes the sage as being like a square which cuts no one with its angles, and like a corner which injures no one with its sharpness.
A square that cuts no one.
Right. It says he is straightforward, but allows himself no license. He is bright, but does not dazzle.
It's a profound balance. Notice that the text doesn't say the sage is some formless blob that simply agrees with everyone and everything.
No, the sage is a square. They have definition, they have principles, they have corners, they are straightforward and honest.
But they've mastered their ego.
Exactly. To such a degree that they never weaponize their shape to cause injury. They possess boundaries, but they don't use those boundaries to punish others.
I think about modern conflict resolution here. Being a square that cuts no one is the ultimate goal. It means you can communicate a difficult truth or hold a firm boundary without using your honesty as a blade to belittle the other person.
You can be entirely straightforward without being cruel.
And that phrase, "he is bright but does not dazzle," is just a perfect litmus test for how we share knowledge. We all know two types of highly intelligent people.
Oh, definitely.
The first type uses their intellect as a weapon of dominance. They use heavy jargon, they talk over people, they try to blind you with their brilliance, they dazzle you.
Which leaves you feeling awestruck, but completely in the dark and usually feeling foolish.
Yeah, exactly. But the second type is bright, and they use their light to illuminate the room so everyone else can see better. They simplify complex topics, they empower you.
They don't need the ego trip of leaving you blinded by their genius.
And the mechanism that allows a person to remain bright without dazzling is found in Chapter 59, right?
Right. Moderation. The text advises that for regulating the human and rendering proper service to the heavenly, there is nothing like moderation.
Because moderation prevents that burnout.
Yes. Moderation is what allows for the repeated accumulation of attributes. When you aren't expending massive amounts of energy trying to dazzle people or constantly sharpening your corners to cut your opponents, you naturally accumulate internal resources.
So granaries fill up.
Your granaries fill up. You grow deep roots and firm stalks. You achieve an enduring capacity precisely because you aren't burning yourself out in a perpetual rigid performance of dominance.
That challenges every instinct we have about proving our worth. And it leads us into a part of the text that feels like a massive paradox.
This is exactly where you're going with this.
If the sage is bright but doesn't dazzle, how do they communicate? Chapter 56 opens with a statement that is famously difficult to swallow. It says, "He who knows the Tao does not care to speak about it. He who is ever ready to speak about it does not know it."
Yep. There it is.
I mean, I have to stop and point out the staggering irony here. We're literally hosting an hour-long deep dive. You are analyzing these texts. We're speaking thousands of words right now.
Are we just proving that we don't know anything?
Right. In a world where you have to speak up to advocate for your career or to fight against injustice or just to participate in society, how can the ultimate wisdom be silence? The author himself wrote a book to tell us not to speak.
It is the ultimate philosophical trap, isn't it? But unraveling it reveals a crucial layer of discernment. The text is not advocating for literal physical muteness.
Okay, good. That's a relief.
It is launching a devastating critique against the human compulsion to categorize, label, and assert the ego through language. Mechanistically, human language is a system of boundaries and reductions.
You have to cut reality into pieces to name it.
Exactly. The moment you take the infinite complexity of reality, the Tao, and try to force it into a sequence of spoken words, you have inherently limited it. The person who confidently speaks, claiming they have the definitive, exhaustive explanation for the universe or for politics or for human nature, is deluding themselves.
They mistake their verbal map for the actual territory.
Precisely. So, he who speaks does not know, targets the arrogance of absolute certainty.
So the person screaming their opinion on the internet doesn't possess deep wisdom. They possess a deep need for validation.
Think about the neurological mechanics of the modern attention economy. We're constantly incentivized to be ever ready to speak.
Social media is built entirely on that.
Platforms are designed to trigger dopamine responses when we broadcast a hot take or win an argument. But that constant opining is cognitively exhausting. It drains our internal fields.
We are just shouting to validate our own existence.
And Chapter 56 offers the antidote to this exhaustion. It says, "The sage will keep his mouth shut and close the portals. He will blunt his sharp points and unravel the complications of things. He will attemper his brightness and bring himself into agreement with the obscurity of others."
The text calls this the mysterious agreement, right?
Yes, the mysterious agreement.
Bringing oneself into agreement with obscurity. I mean, in a culture that worships fame, visibility, going viral, building a platform, the idea of intentionally choosing obscurity feels so alien.
It goes against everything we're taught.
We spend so much energy terrified of being forgotten, of being a nobody. But there is a profound liberation hidden in that phrase. If you agree with obscurity, you no longer have to be the center of attention.
You don't have to carry the burden of having a brilliant comeback in every single argument.
You don't have to prove you are the smartest person in the room. You can just observe.
And the psychological freedom of that state is immense. The text concludes that the person who achieves this mysterious agreement is beyond all consideration of profit or injury, of nobility or meanness.
Because they aren't playing the game anymore.
Exactly. Look at how much of human behavior is driven by the binary anxieties of profit and injury. Will speaking up make me look important, or will it make me look weak? Will this action gain me status or lose me money?
So when you blunt your sharp points and agree with obscurity, you step entirely off that transactional treadmill.
You can no longer be manipulated by the promise of profit, and you can no longer be paralyzed by the fear of injury.
When you think about your own life, for the listener, and the complicated interpersonal conflicts you face, whether at work or with your family, our default setting is always to sharpen the points.
Oh, absolutely.
We gather our evidence, we prepare our talking points, we draft the angry email in our heads while taking a shower, we get ready to strike.
The practical application here is to do the exact opposite. In the next conflict, instead of attacking, try unraveling the complications. Lower the temperature.
Ask a question instead of making an accusation.
Temper your brightness.
Yeah.
Let go of that desperate, burning need to prove that you are right and they are wrong.
When you refuse to bring a sharp sword to a conflict, it is amazing how quickly the other person's anger loses its fuel. The conflict just unravels because you aren't providing any rigid surface for them to strike against.
It requires immense internal discipline not to swing back, of course. But the energy you save by not engaging in that rigid combat can then be redirected to your internal fields.
Which brings us to the monumental corner of scale. We've been discussing this primarily through the lens of individual behavior, personal energy, and one-on-one conflict.
Right.
But how does this philosophy scale to the macro level? Like, how do you take a philosophy of softness, silence, and non-action and apply it to running a global corporation, or managing a large institution, or governing a nation?
That's where Chapter 57 and Chapter 60 come in. They tackle this directly, moving into the art of leadership. And this is where we return to that brilliant hook we started with.
The frying pan.
Yes. Chapter 60 famously states, governing a great state is like cooking small fish.
The brilliance of the small fish metaphor is that it understands complex, delicate systems.
That's right. When a leader steps into a new role, whether as a CEO, a school principal, or a head of state, their first instinct is usually to prove their value through immediate, visible action.
They want to shake things up. They start poking the fish.
They implement new reporting structures. They demand daily updates. They introduce new layers of middle management to oversee the processes.
We call it KPI tracking, quarterly performance reviews, synergistic realignment. It's the modern corporate equivalent of flipping the fish every 30 seconds to make sure it's cooking.
But every time you poke the fish, you break the delicate connective tissue holding it together.
And Chapter 57 explicitly warns us about the systemic consequences of this overmanagement.
It does. The author observes that in the kingdom, the multiplication of prohibitive enactments increases the poverty of the people.
Meaning more rules equals less prosperity.
Right. He states that the more implements to add to their profit that the people have, the greater disorder there is. And most counterintuitively, he claims that the more display there is of legislation, the more thieves and robbers there are.
That last point forces a complete double take. I mean, the standard human logic is that laws prevent crime. If you have thieves, you need more legislation to catch them. How does more legislation create more thieves?
To understand this, we have to look at the psychological mechanics of friction and reactance. In modern organizational psychology, there is a phenomenon related to the Hawthorne effect, mixed with Goodhart's law.
Goodhart's law is the one about metrics, right?
Exactly. It states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. When a government or a corporation creates an endlessly complex web of rules, restrictions, and artificial metrics, they fundamentally alter the environment.
They introduce immense cognitive load.
The workers or citizens are no longer focused on doing good work or living harmoniously. Their primary focus shifts to navigating the bureaucracy. The system becomes so oppressive that the only way to survive, or to get anything done, is to look for loopholes.
So if you measure software developers purely by lines of code written, they will write incredibly bloated, inefficient code just to hit the metric. The rule meant to increase productivity actually destroys the product.
Exactly the dynamic. If you create 1,000 hyper-specific laws regarding taxation or behavior, you instantly create 1,000 new ways for a normal person to become a criminal.
The legislation breeds the thieves because it criminalizes the natural flow of human activity.
The friction of the bureaucracy makes honest work impossible. The micromanagement itself is the source of the disorder.
The proposed solution is staggering for anyone in a leadership position today. The sage leader says, I will do nothing of purpose, and the people will be transformed of themselves. I will be fond of keeping still, and the people will of themselves become correct.
It goes on. I will take no trouble about it, and the people will of themselves become rich. I will manifest no ambition, and the people will of themselves attain to the primitive simplicity.
Doing nothing of purpose. If a modern board of directors heard a CEO say that, they would fire them on the spot. We expect leaders to be constantly, visibly active.
But we must interpret doing nothing through the lens of everything we've unpacked so far. It doesn't mean abandoning the kitchen while the kitchen burns down.
Right. It means putting the fish in the pan, ensuring the heat, the fundamental environment, is correct, and then having the profound discipline to step back.
Doing nothing of purpose means taking no action driven by ego, vanity, or the anxious need to forcefully dictate the exact shape of the outcome. It means trusting the distributed intelligence of the people you are leading.
When the leader keeps still, it lowers the anxiety of the entire organization. People don't have to spend their energy navigating the leader's ego or deciphering the new set of contradictory rules.
They can just focus on cultivating their own fields.
There is a fascinating, almost mystical element in Chapter 60 that I feel like we have to translate for today because it deals with the unintended consequences of leadership.
Oh, the ghosts.
Yes. After the cooking small fish metaphor, the text says, Let the kingdom be governed according to the Tao, and the manes of the departed will not manifest their spiritual energy. It is not that those manes have not that spiritual energy, but it will not be employed to hurt men. Neither does the ruling sage hurt them.
The manes of the departed. It refers to ghosts or ancestral spirits.
Which sounds very spooky for a leadership manual.
Right. In the ancient context, if a society was disordered or a ruler was cruel, the belief was that the abused spirits of the ancestors would rise up and cause famine, disease, and chaos. But there is a massive psychological truth buried in this ancient cosmology for us today.
Every complex system, a nation, a corporation, a family, has ghosts.
They absolutely do. The ghosts are the legacy debt. They are the historical grievances, the lingering resentments from a previous toxic manager, the unhealed generational trauma in a family, or the deep socioeconomic scars in a society.
And those ghosts possess real energy. They have the power to completely derail the present.
Think about it. If a new CEO comes into an organization that has survived 3 rounds of brutal layoffs under a previous leader, that building is haunted.
Totally haunted. The employees are carrying the trauma of those layoffs.
So if the new CEO comes in, poking the fish, aggressively rolling out new tracking software, demanding immediate compliance, asserting dominance, they're going to wake up the ghosts.
The employees will immediately project all their historical resentment onto the new leader. The trauma response is triggered, and the ghosts employ their energy to hurt the system.
But the text argues that when a leader governs according to the Tao with softness, stillness, and non-action, they don't trigger those historical resentments. The text says neither does the ruling sage hurt them.
The gentle moderation of the leader creates an environment of profound psychological safety.
Because there are no sharp corners cutting the employees and no dazzling displays of ego blinding them, the trauma of the past isn't aggravated.
The old grievances lose their power to disrupt the present. By refusing to hurt the system, the leader puts the ghosts to rest.
And the final promise of chapter 60 is that when the leader and the environment are in harmony, when the past and the present are no longer in violent conflict, their good influences converge.
The natural goodness of the system emerges on its own, not because it was forced, but because it was finally allowed to grow.
It is a profound paradigm shift. We spend so much of our lives operating under the assumption that if we aren't exhausted, we aren't doing enough.
We're told from childhood to accumulate sharp edges, loud voices, and elegant robes. We are taught to conquer the byways, to build massive courtyards, and to make sure everyone knows exactly who we are.
But the quiet, enduring wisdom here asks us to consider if all of that effort is a trap. What if the ultimate achievement of human existence isn't to become a highly visible, heavily armored somebody?
What if the goal is to safely and securely become a nobody?
To return to the harmony of the infant, to become the quiet, unplowed field that actually sustains life, rather than the manicured courtyard that merely shows off.
It is the invitation to engage in the mysterious operation of a life well lived without the need for applause, possession, or rigid control.
True peace might just be the realization that the universe doesn't need you to force it into submission. It just needs you to stop fighting it.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.